In a mansion drowned in silence and despair, a child has screamed non-stop since her mother's passing. Every caregiver failed, but an untrained woman calms the girl with a single look. What she uncovers reveals dangerous truths and the chance for an unexpected cure. Before we begin, join our family here on the channel. Subscribe now, leave a like, it helps our work so much, and write in the comments which city you're watching from. I love knowing how far our stories reach. The heavy silence that should have inhabited the luxurious house in the Kensington neighbourhood of London was constantly broken by soul-piercing screams. Maria Hayes held the strap of her work bag tightly as she walked along the cobblestone sidewalk, observing the imposing mansions that rose like fortresses of glass and concrete. At 42, she was well acquainted with the routine of cleaning high-end residences, but she had never witnessed anything like what awaited her on that cold June morning. The electronic gate buzzed when she pressed the button, and a tired, rough male voice answered from the other side. "Maria, please, come in." The gate opened automatically, revealing a meticulously cared-for garden where red roses contrasted with the perfect grass. But that external beauty couldn't mask the heavy atmosphere emanating from the three-story house, with its tinted glass windows that looked like closed eyes, avoiding the sight of the world. Maria had worked for the Perfect Home Cleaning Company for 4 years and was accustomed to the discretion the job required. Residences like that demanded invisibility, silent efficiency, and above all, the ability to ignore the personal dramas that occasionally revealed themselves between open doors and phone conversations. She had seen it all: marriages in ruins, troubled children, family secrets that unfolded like television soap operas, but nothing had prepared her for what she would find in that house. When the front door opened, Maria was met by a man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. Raphael Thompson was 38, but he looked at least 10 years older. His brown eyes, which must have once shone with life, now looked like frosted glass. His dark hair was disheveled, his unshaven beard told a story of sleepless nights, and his wrinkled clothes suggested he had spent another night on the living room sofa. Maria noticed his hands trembled slightly as he greeted her. "Thank you for coming," Raphael said, his voice hoarse. "I know the situation here is complicated." "Did Maria from the agency explain?" She nodded discreetly, remembering the brief conversation she'd had with her supervisor the day before. "Family going through a difficult time, a small child, needs someone experienced and patient," her boss had said without going into specific details. Maria had never imagined that difficult time was such an understatement. That's when the screams began. The sound that echoed through the walls of the house was not an ordinary child's cry. Maria had raised 3 children of her own and cared for dozens of nieces and nephews throughout her life. She knew every type of cry: hunger, sleepiness, tantrums, pain, fussiness. But this was different. It was a visceral scream filled with pure terror, as if the child were facing monsters only she could see. The sound seemed to tear through the air, creating an atmosphere of despair that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Raphael closed his eyes and ran his hands over his face, as if trying to erase his own existence. "She's been like this for 6 months, he murmured. "Ever since—" He stopped mid-sentence, swallowing the words that refused to come out. "Ever since my wife, Lucy, had to be hospitalized. She had a very serious psychological breakdown after a car accident. She couldn't handle the pressure anymore, the motherhood, life itself. The doctor said she needs intensive treatment at a specialized clinic." Maria felt her heart ache. She knew what it was like to fight against life's adversities, what it felt like for the ground to open up beneath your feet. "And the little girl?" she asked softly. "Helen. She's 1 year and 2 months old. She was the light of Lucy's eyes. When Lucy was hospitalized, Helen just fell into despair. It's as if she knows something terrible happened, but can't understand what." Raphael walked to the living room window, looking out at the garden without really seeing the flowers blooming under the morning sun. "I've tried everything. I hired the best nannies in London, professionals with years of experience, specialized in childcare, some even with degrees in child psychology." The screams grew louder, more desperate. Maria could hear the real anguish in that child's voice, and her maternal instinct spoke louder than any professional protocol. "How many nannies have been through here?" 18, Raphael answered, his voice bitter. 18 qualified women who couldn't last even a week. The last one, Constance, was an experienced older woman with 15 years in the profession. She left here yesterday in tears, saying she had never witnessed anything like it. She said Helen's screams weren't normal, that there was something very wrong happening. Maria swallowed hard. "And the doctors? What do they say?" "I've taken Helen to 5 different pediatricians. They all say she's physically fine. We've done blood tests, CT scans, neurological tests. Nothing. The child psychologists talk about emotional trauma, but no treatment has worked." Raphael turned, facing Maria with pleading eyes. "I don't know what to do anymore. I can't work. I can't sleep. I can't even look at my daughter without feeling like I'm failing as a father." The scream suddenly stopped, creating a silence, even more disturbing than the previous noise. Maria noticed Raphael tensed up, as if expecting the nightmare to start again at any moment. "She stops crying sometimes," he explained, "but it's always temporary. 10 minutes at most, and then it starts again. It's like she's in an endless cycle of despair." Maria looked around the room. The decor was impeccable, with modern designer furniture, expensive paintings on the walls, and a sound system that probably cost more than her annual salary. But all that material wealth seemed empty, lifeless, like a theatre set after the show has ended. There were toys scattered on the floor, most still in their original packaging, as if someone had desperately tried to buy happiness back. "Can I see her?" Maria asked, surprising herself with the question. She had been hired for cleaning, not childcare, but something in her heart pulled her toward that suffering child. Raphael hesitated. "Maria, you don't understand. She doesn't react well to strangers. In fact, she doesn't react well to anyone, not even me." The pain in his voice was palpable. "My own daughter is afraid of me. Every time I enter her room, the screams get even worse. It's as if I'm the monster she fears." But Maria was already walking toward the staircase leading to the second floor. Something inexplicable guided her, an intuition she couldn't ignore. Raphael followed her, murmuring warnings about what she might find, about how Helen would react badly to the presence of another stranger. The girl's room was at the end of the hall. The door was ajar, and Maria could hear ragged breathing coming from inside. When she gently pushed the door open, her heart nearly stopped. In the corner of the room, curled up like a wounded animal, was a small girl with curly brown hair. Her large dark eyes were red from crying, and she clutched a piece of blue fabric to her chest, which looked like a scarf. Helen looked up as Maria entered the room, and for a few seconds, the world seemed to stand still. The girl stopped sobbing, her little eyes fixed on Maria's face, and something inexplicable happened. Instead of the screams Raphael had predicted, Helen simply fell silent, studying this new presence with cautious curiosity. Maria slowly knelt down, getting to the child's level. "Hi, Helen," she said in a sweet, calm voice. "My name is Maria. That's a beautiful scarf you have there." The girl clutched the blue fabric even tighter to her chest, but she didn't scream. She didn't run. She just watched. Raphael stood in the doorway, dumbfounded. "I don't believe it," he murmured. She didn't scream. In 6 months, she hasn't been silent in the presence of any stranger. Maria gently extended her hand toward Helen, without touching, just offering. "Can I sit here next to you?" she asked. The girl didn't answer, but she also didn't move away. Slowly, Maria sat on the floor, maintaining a respectful distance. It was then that she noticed other worrying details. Helen was visibly underweight for her age. Her skin was pale, almost transparent, and there were deep, dark circles under her eyes. Even more alarming was her behavior. Even in silence, she rocked her body back and forth, a repetitive motion that suggested deep stress. "Raphael," Maria said quietly, without taking her eyes off Helen, "how long has it been since she's eaten properly?" "She eats very little, almost nothing, really. The doctors said it's common in cases of severe emotional trauma. She's lost a lot of weight in the last few months." Raphael cautiously entered the room, staying far enough away not to frighten his daughter. "I've tried everything. Different foods, different schedules, different people to feed her. Nothing works. Maria observed that whenever Raphael spoke or moved, Helen became visibly tense. Her small body curled up even more, and she pressed the blue scarf against her face as if trying to hide behind it. It was clear that her own father's presence put her on high alert. "That scarf," Maria said softly. "It's special to you, isn't it, Helen?" The girl looked directly into Maria's eyes for the first time. For a moment her lips moved as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. "It's Lucy's," Raphael explained, his voice choked with emotion. "It was my wife's favorite scarf. Helen hasn't let go of it since Lucy left. It's the only thing that seems to calm her, at least a little." Maria watched Helen for a few more minutes, noticing every detail of her behavior. The girl's movements were cautious, as if she expected something bad to happen at any moment. Her eyes would dart to the door, always checking for escape routes. It was the behavior of someone who had learned that the world was a dangerous place. "Raphael, can you leave me alone with her for a few minutes?" Maria asked. He hesitated. "Are you sure? If she starts screaming, you should leave immediately. The noise can be very disturbing." "Trust me," Maria said, with a confidence she didn't know where it came from. When Raphael left and gently closed the door, Maria and Helen were alone. The silence was almost palpable, broken only by the sound of the girl's breathing and the distant city traffic outside. Maria began to speak softly, not directly to Helen, but as if talking to herself. "You know, Helen, I have a special scarf too. It belonged to my mother. When I was little like you and got scared, I would hold this scarf very tight and feel like she was with me." Maria took a simple, time-faded white cotton scarf from her bag. "It's not as pretty as yours, but it makes me feel safe too." Helen watched Maria's scarf with interest, comparing it to her own. "Sometimes," Maria continued, "when the people we love have to go away, they leave little pieces of themselves with us. Your blue scarf has your mummy's scent, doesn't it? And that makes you remember her warmth." For a few moments Helen seemed to process these words. Then something extraordinary happened. She let go of the scarf with one hand and extended a tiny finger toward Maria's scarf. She didn't quite touch it, but the gesture was enough for Maria to know a connection had been formed. "You know," Maria said, carefully putting her scarf away, "I came here today to clean the house. But maybe I can do other things too. Maybe I can stay here with you for a little while if you'd like." Helen didn't respond verbally, but for the first time in 6 months, a 1-year-old child felt safe enough to close her eyes in the presence of a stranger. Maria remained seated on the floor, watching that small, wounded soul finally relax, even if only for a few moments. When Raphael returned to the room 20 minutes later, he found a scene he hadn't seen in half a year. His daughter sleeping peacefully, and a woman who had arrived as a cleaner, but who clearly possessed a special gift for healing broken hearts. When Raphael saw his daughter sleeping in a stranger's arms, for the first time in 6 months he had to lean against the doorframe to keep from falling. The tears he had long tried to hold back finally streamed freely down his face, silent and heavy with a relief so profound it was almost painful. Maria looked at him with understanding, gesturing with her free hand for him to remain silent so as not to wake Helen. The minutes dragged on like hours. Raphael watched his daughter breathe calmly, something that hadn't happened in so long. He had forgotten what a peaceful house sounded like. Helen's face was relaxed, her small fists finally unclenched, her mother's blue scarf still secure in her arms, but without the usual desperate tension. It was as if, for the first time since Lucy was hospitalized, the girl had found a safe harbor. Maria remained still, letting Helen rest in her lap, but her observant eyes kept scanning for details that the previous nannies might have missed. The girl's fingernails were bitten to the quick, a concerning self-destructive behavior for someone so young. There were small red marks around her wrists, as if she had a habit of scratching herself when nervous. But what caught Maria's attention most was an almost imperceptible sweet and medicinal odor that seemed to emanate from the child herself. When Helen finally woke up 40 minutes later, there were no screams. She opened her large, dark eyes, looked directly at Maria, and to the astonishment of everyone present, managed something that could be considered a smile. It was shy, hesitant, as if she had forgotten how to smile and was trying to remember. But it was there. "My God," Raphael murmured, cautiously entering the room. "It's been so long since I've seen her smile." But as soon as Helen noticed her father's presence, the transformation was immediate and devastating. Her small body stiffened completely, her eyes widened in terror, and she pressed herself even closer to Maria, as if trying to merge with her to escape some imminent danger. She didn't scream, but she was visibly panicked. Maria's heart ached as she witnessed that reaction. "Raphael," she said softly, "maybe it's better if you step back a little. Let her get used to your presence gradually." The pain on Raphael's face was evident. Seeing his own daughter fear him was a torture no parent should have to endure. "She wasn't like this before," he said, retreating into the hallway. "Helen loved me. She would laugh when I came home, reach her little arms out for me, sleep on my chest. After the accident with Lucy, after she was hospitalized, it's as if I'm to blame for everything that happened." "And do you blame yourself?" Maria asked, still holding Helen, who had relaxed again as soon as Raphael was out of her line of sight. The silence that followed was more telling than any answer. Raphael leaned against the hallway wall, running his hands through, his hair in despair. "If I hadn't argued with Lucy that night, if I hadn't been so hard on her about the difficulties she was facing with motherhood, she never would have left the house with Helen. The accident never would have happened. She wouldn't be in a clinic now fighting a postpartum depression that turned into something much more serious." Maria continued to stroke Helen's curly hair. The girl had closed her eyes again, but remained alert. "Tell me about that night," she requested, with the gentleness of someone who knew how to listen without judging. "It was 3 days before the accident. Lucy had been going through a very difficult time since Helen's birth. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly, cried for no apparent reason. I thought it was just new mum exhaustion. I didn't understand she was asking for help." Raphael slid down the wall until he was sitting on the hallway floor, his head in his hands. "That night, she told me she felt like she was failing as a mother, that she couldn't connect with Helen the way she expected. Instead of supporting her, I told her she was being dramatic, that all mothers go through this." Helen stirred in Maria's lap, murmuring soft sounds that seemed to be attempts at communication. Maria responded with reassuring whispers, creating a silent dialogue between them. "Go on," Maria encouraged. "Lucy left the house that night saying she needed some air, that she felt suffocated. She took Helen in the car, saying a drive might help them both calm down. They crashed the car 3 blocks away. Nothing serious physically, just a few scratches, but it was the trigger for Lucy's emotional collapse. She panicked, started screaming that she was a terrible mother, that she could have hurt our daughter, that Helen would be better off away from her." Maria closed her eyes, imagining the trauma that situation must have caused for everyone involved. "And Helen witnessed all of this?" "Everything. Lucy's screams, the paramedics, the sirens, the confusion. A 10-month-old baby absorbing all that energy of terror and despair. In the following days, Lucy got much worse. She couldn't hold Helen anymore, said she was afraid of hurting her. It was the doctors who recommended hospitalization in a clinic specializing in maternal mental health. Helen had fallen asleep again, but this time it was a restless sleep. Her small limbs twitched occasionally, as if she were dreaming of stressful situations. Maria noticed that even while sleeping, the girl maintained an iron grip on the blue scarf. "Raphael, can I ask you a question that might sound strange?" Maria said. "Of course. Anything. Is Helen taking any kind of medication?" The silence that followed was too long to be casual. Maria repeated the question, this time looking directly at Raphael. "Is she being medicated?" "Why do you ask?" Raphael's voice had changed, becoming defensive. "Because there's a scent on her breath, a medicinal odor, and her behavior, while traumatized, has characteristics that make me think of sedation. The way she's slow to react to stimuli, how her movements are slightly sluggish for a child her age." Raphael closed his eyes, as if he'd been caught in a terrible lie. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with shame. "A doctor recommended it. A child sleep specialist my company referred. He said it was normal in cases like Helen's, that a little help sleeping would be beneficial for her and for me. What kind of medication, Raphael? Something to calm her down, to help her sleep at night. She would spend entire nights screaming, waking up the whole neighborhood. I was desperate. I couldn't work. I couldn't think straight. The words tumbled out, as if he were trying to justify a decision he knew was wrong. The doctor said it was temporary, just until she stabilized emotionally. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. Did this doctor examine Helen in person? Did he talk to her pediatrician? Did he run any tests? Raphael's silence was answer enough. Raphael, Maria said firmly, but without judgment, what medication exactly are you giving her? Rivotril, half a pill dissolved in her milk every night before bed. Maria had to make a conscious effort not to raise her voice and wake Helen. Rivotril, or clonazepam, was a powerful benzodiazepine used to treat severe anxiety and seizures in adults. Giving that medication to a 1-year-old child without proper medical supervision was extremely dangerous. How long has she been taking this? 4 months, since 2 weeks after Lucy was hospitalized. 4 months. Maria did a quick calculation. A 1-year-old child, weighing approximately 22 pounds, taking benzodiazepines for 4 consecutive months. The neurological damage could be irreversible, but she had to stay calm. She couldn't scare Raphael to the point where he shut down completely. And does it work? Does she sleep better? At first, yes. She would stop screaming and sleep through the night. I could finally get a few hours of rest, but over time, the effect seemed to diminish. She started waking up in the middle of the night again, but now she was different, as if she were in a state between sleeping and waking, crying but not fully conscious. Maria looked at Helen sleeping in her arms and felt a mixture of anger and compassion. Anger at the irresponsibility of a desperate father and a doctor who prescribed serious medication without an in-person examination. Compassion for a child who was being inadvertently harmed by the person who should have been protecting her. Raphael, do you have the medicine's packaging? Can I see the leaflet? He hesitated, but after a few seconds he stood up and walked to another room. He returned with a small blue and white box. Maria carefully read the information, and every line confirmed her worst fears. Contraindicated for children under 6. May cause physical dependence. Withdrawal syndrome may include seizures and behavioral changes. Prolonged use may affect neurological development. Raphael, she said carefully, we need to talk about this. But first, I need you to trust me. Helen is going to be okay, but we're going to have to make some important changes. Changes? First, this medication needs to be stopped, but gradually and under medical supervision. Second, Helen needs specialized care to deal with the withdrawal. Third, you're going to need psychological support to deal with the guilt and learn how to reconnect with your daughter. Tears returned to Raphael's eyes. I've ruined everything, haven't I? I've hurt my own daughter trying to help. You acted out of desperation, not malice. That makes a difference. But now we need to act quickly to fix the situation. Maria adjusted Helen more comfortably in her arms. And I'm going to help you. You'll stay, even after knowing all this? Maria looked at Helen, then at Raphael. 2 lost souls who needed guidance, care, someone who wouldn't give up on them when things got tough. I'll stay, she said, but on a few conditions. First, complete honesty from now on. Second, you do exactly as I say when it comes to Helen's health. Third, we seek proper medical help today. Raphael nodded eagerly, like a man who finally saw a light at the end of the tunnel. And Raphael, Maria added, Helen doesn't hate you. She's scared, confused by the medication, traumatized by her mother's absence. But with time, patience, and a lot of love, you can rebuild your relationship. At that moment, Helen opened her eyes and looked directly at Maria. Then, for the second time that day, she smiled. And this time, Raphael was watching from a distance, seeing that there was still hope for his broken family. The first night without the medication was a test of emotional endurance that neither of the adults present was prepared for. Maria had insisted they immediately contact Helen's pediatrician, Dr. Edward Miller, who had cared for the family since the girl's birth. When Raphael explained over the phone what he had been doing for the past 4 months, the doctor's silence was so long and heavy that for a moment Raphael thought the call had dropped. "Raphael," Dr. Miller finally said, his voice controlled but filled with concern, "I need to examine Helen immediately. What you've described could have caused serious damage to her neurological development. Benzodiazepines in children. This young can cause severe side effects, including physical dependence." Dr. Miller's office was in a private clinic in Notting Hill, a 20-minute drive from Raphael's house. Maria insisted on accompanying the father and daughter, realizing her presence had an unexplainable calming effect on Helen. During the drive, the girl remained quiet in Maria's lap, but her little eyes were more alert than usual, as if some primal instinct was warning her that significant changes were coming. The pediatrician's office was decorated with soft colors and educational toys, but Helen showed little interest in her surroundings. She clung to Maria, observing everything with suspicion. When Dr. Miller entered the room, a tall man with graying hair and a kind expression, Helen immediately hid her face in Maria's neck. "Hello, Helen," the doctor said in a soft voice, keeping a respectful distance. "You've grown so much since I last saw you." He turned to Raphael. "When was her last routine checkup?" 3 months ago, Raphael admitted, his shame evident. "I was avoiding bringing her in because I knew you'd ask questions I didn't want to answer." Dr. Miller nodded gravely. "I'll need to give Helen a full examination. Raphael, can you show me the medication you were administering? And Maria," he looked at her with curiosity, "are you family?" "No," Maria replied. I was the cleaner, but Helen seems to feel safe with me, so Raphael asked me to stay." The doctor observed the interaction between Maria and Helen, noting how the child relaxed in the woman's presence. "Interesting. Helen has always been very selective with strangers, even before the problems began. She clearly trusts you." The examination was careful and revealing. Dr. Miller checked Helen's reflexes, tested her motor coordination, verified her weight and height, and asked a series of detailed questions about the girl's behavior. What he discovered was alarming. Helen is about 7 pounds underweight for her age. Her reflexes are slightly diminished, which is consistent with prolonged benzodiazepine use. Even more concerning is her speech development. At 14 months, she should be saying at least 5 to 10 simple words. She hasn't said a single word during the entire exam. Raphael swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" "It means we need to act quickly to reverse the effects of the medication. The good news is that children this age have an incredible capacity for recovery, as long as the treatment is appropriate." Dr. Miller turned to Maria. "Would you be willing to help with the recovery process? Helen clearly feels safe with you, and that will be crucial in the coming days." Maria looked at Helen, who had fallen asleep in her arms during the exam. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I'll be happy to help." "Excellent. Now about withdrawing the medication. We can't just stop it cold turkey. Helen could experience withdrawal syndrome, which in children can include extreme irritability, sleep disturbances, tremors, and even seizures. We will reduce the dose gradually over the course of a week." He prescribed a detailed schedule: 3/4 of the dose for 2 days, half the dose for 2 days, 1/4 of the dose for 2 days, and then a complete stop. During this period, Helen will likely be very irritable and may have trouble sleeping. You need to prepare for some difficult nights. "Doctor," Maria asked, "is there anything we can do to help Helen cope with the discomfort without using medication?" "Yes. Constant physical contact, a calm and stable environment, a predictable routine, and patience. A lot of patience." Dr. Miller looked seriously at Raphael. "Raphael, Helen is not going to get better overnight. You will face some very tough days before you see real progress, but if we follow the protocol correctly, she can make a full recovery." When they returned home late that afternoon, Maria made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "Raphael, I'm going to stay here tonight. Helen will need constant care, and you need support." "Maria, you don't have to do this. You've already done more than I could ever expect from anyone." "It's not a matter of having to," Maria said, adjusting Helen, who had woken up on the way back. It's a matter of wanting to. This child needs care and you both need help. My children are grown. I live alone. I can dedicate myself to this for the next few days. Raphael was silent for a few moments, processing the generosity of this woman who had entered their lives just 12 hours earlier. Why are you doing this for us? You don't even know us. Maria looked at Helen, who was distractedly playing with her mother's blue scarf. Because sometimes life puts us in the right place at the right time to make a difference. And because every child deserves to feel safe and loved. The first night was a test of physical and emotional endurance. Helen received only 3/4 of her usual dose, and the effects were immediate. Around 10 o'clock at night, when she would normally be deeply sedated, Helen began to show signs of agitation. First came low moans, then restlessness, and finally screams that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Maria and Raphael took turns trying to calm her. Nothing worked for long. Helen cried for hours, stopped for a few minutes when Maria rocked her, and then started again with even greater intensity. Around 3 in the morning, she had developed a low-grade fever and occasional tremors in her hands. "She's suffering," Raphael said, sitting on the bedroom floor, visibly exhausted. "Maybe we should give her the full dose just for tonight to ease her suffering." "No," Maria said firmly, though she too was exhausted. "Dr. Miller was very clear. If we go back now, we'll have to start the whole process over. Helen is strong, she'll get through this." But watching that small child fight against chemical effects she couldn't even understand was heartbreaking. Helen was sweating, trembling, and her little eyes were red from crying. Her mother's blue scarf was soaked with tears. It was around 4 in the morning when something unexpected happened. Helen was in Maria's arms, crying more softly now, when she suddenly looked towards Raphael and held out one of her small hands in his direction. It wasn't an accidental movement. It was intentional, as if she knew she needed the comfort of both adults to face this difficult moment. Raphael froze. Is she asking me to come closer?" Slowly, Maria guided him. Very slowly. Raphael approached cautiously and with infinite care touched Helen's outstretched hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her tiny fingers around her father's index finger. It was a small moment, almost insignificant to an outside observer, but for Raphael it represented the first sign that maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild the relationship with his daughter. "Hi, Helen," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Daddy's here. Daddy won't let anything bad happen to you." Helen didn't stop crying, but she kept her hand connected to Raphael's. For the next 40 minutes, Maria held Helen while Raphael held her hand. It was as if the three of them had formed a human chain of support, a small family fighting together against adversity. When Helen finally fell asleep at 5:30 in the morning, she was in Maria's lap, but still holding tightly to her father's finger. Raphael didn't move for the next 3 hours, afraid of breaking the fragile connection that had formed. During the morning, while Helen slept heavily, Maria took the opportunity to explore more details of the house she hadn't noticed before. In the master bedroom, she found photos of Raphael and Lucy in happier times, a honeymoon, on a paradise beach, Helen's baby shower, the first family photos in the hospital right after the birth. They were images of a real love, of people who had once been happy together. But she also found signs of Lucy's deteriorating mental health. There were books on postpartum depression scattered on the bedside table, prescriptions for antidepressants with recent dates, and a diary where Lucy described her difficulties in connecting emotionally with Helen. "I love my daughter more than life itself," one entry read, "but I can't feel the joy I expected to feel. It's like there's a pane of glass between us and I can't break it. I'm afraid she'll realize her mother isn't the loving, instinctive woman she deserves." Maria closed the diary with a heavy heart. This family had been through deep emotional trauma long before the situation with the medication. Lucy had fought postpartum depression without adequate support. Raphael had felt helpless to assist his wife, and Helen had grown up absorbing all that emotional tension. When Raphael woke up around 10 in the morning, he found Maria preparing a light soup in the kitchen. Helen was still sleeping, but it was a more natural sleep than in previous weeks, without the deep sedation of the medication. "How are you feeling?" Maria asked. "Exhausted, but different. Last night when she held my hand, it was the first time in months I felt like she saw me as a father, not a threat." Raphael poured himself some coffee and sat at the kitchen table. "Maria, how did you know giving her the medication was wrong? Do you have medical training?" "No. But I raised 3 children and have cared for many others throughout my life. There are certain things you learn only through experience, and there was something about Helen's behavior that didn't align with simple emotional trauma. The slow movements, the delayed reactions, the medicinal smell. They were signs that something chemical was interfering with her natural development." "Why did you decide to get so involved? You could have just done your cleaning job and left." Maria reflected for a few moments before answering. "Because when I was Helen's age, my mother went through a severe depression. My father didn't know how to handle the situation, and I grew up feeling like I was to blame for the family's problems. It took me years to recover emotionally from that experience. And you saw Helen going through the same thing. I saw a small child carrying guilt and fears that weren't hers. I saw a desperate father trying to do the best he could with the limited information he had, and I saw an opportunity to perhaps prevent this family from going through the same difficult years my family went through." Helen woke up in the mid-afternoon, and this time there was a noticeable difference in her behavior. Although she was still clearly uncomfortable due to the reduced medication, she was more alert, more present. Her eyes fixed on people and objects around her for longer, and she showed interest in some toys Raphael had bought weeks before. More importantly, when Raphael entered the room, Helen didn't panic. She tensed up, but she didn't scream. And when he sat on the floor at a safe distance, she watched him with curiosity instead of terror. "Hello, Helen," Raphael said softly. "Daddy brought some new toys for you. Do you want to see?" Helen didn't respond verbally, but her eyes followed Raphael's movement as he showed her a small blue teddy bear. For a few minutes, father and daughter played peekaboo with the bear, with Maria serving as an emotional bridge between them. It was small progress, almost imperceptible to a casual observer. But for a family that had spent 6 months in an emotional war, those few minutes of peace represented the beginning of a healing journey that would still be long, but now finally seemed possible. The second week brought changes that no one had anticipated. Helen had been officially off the medication for 3 days, and although the physical symptoms of withdrawal had significantly diminished, her behavior was transforming in surprising ways. It was as if, little by little, the girl's true personality was emerging from a chemical fog that had kept her suppressed for months. Maria woke up on Thursday morning to a sound she hadn't heard in a long time. Helen babbling to herself in her crib. They weren't screams of despair or moans of discomfort. They were sounds of experimentation, as if she were testing her own voice. When Maria entered the room, she found Helen sitting up, holding the blue scarf in one hand and pointing to the window with the other. "Ah," Helen said clearly, pointing to the sunlight streaming through the curtain. Maria's heart raced. It was the first intelligible syllable Helen had uttered since she arrived at the house. "Ah, yes, Helen. It's the sunlight. Sun," Maria repeated, pointing to the window. "Sa," Helen tried, her tongue still clumsy from her delayed development, but with a clear intent to communicate. When Raphael came down for breakfast, Maria could barely contain her excitement. She spoke Raphael. Helen tried to say, "Sun." It's the first real sign that her language development is recovering. Raphael dropped his coffee mug in the sink and ran to Helen's room. When he got there, the girl was in Maria's arms, but this time she showed no fear at the sight of him. Instead, she looked him directly in the eyes and pointed at him. "Da," she said, experimentally. The tears came before Raphael could control them. Da was the beginning of Daddy. After months of feeling like a threatening stranger in his own daughter's life, there was finally recognition, an attempt at verbal connection. "That's right, Helen. Da-dee. I'm Daddy," he said, approaching slowly and sitting in the chair next to the crib. Helen watched him for a few moments, processing. Then, with visible effort, she tried again. "Dada." The progress in the following days was remarkable. Helen began to experiment with other words: Ma for Maria, SC for the blue scarf she never let go of, T for tea when she wanted a drink, and a clearly articulated no when she didn't want something. It was as if she were catching up on months of linguistic development in a matter of days. But the real transformation was happening in the family dynamic. Raphael had taken 2 weeks off work to dedicate himself fully to Helen's recovery, and for the first time since her birth he was truly present as a father. He learned how to change diapers properly, to identify her different types of cries, to read the non-verbal cues Helen gave when she was hungry, sleepy, or simply wanted attention. Maria watched this transformation with the satisfaction of someone seeing a well-laid plan unfold, but also with the melancholy of someone who knew her mission there was coming to an end. Raphael was becoming the father Helen needed, and although Maria's presence was still important, it was no longer essential to the family's functioning. It was on Thursday of the second week that the call came that would change everything. Raphael was in the garden with Helen, trying to teach her to identify the different flowers, when his phone rang. It was Dr. Anthony Clark, the psychiatrist responsible for Lucy's treatment at the renewal clinic where she was staying. Raphael, I have good news about Lucy. She has made very significant progress in recent weeks. The antidepressant medication is working well, the intensive therapy is helping, and she's showing clear signs of improvement. We're considering discharging her next month. Raphael felt as if the world had stopped. During all those difficult months, a part of him had desperately wished for Lucy to come home and help with Helen. But now, just as he was finally learning to be a father on his own, the news brought conflicting feelings. How is she handling the idea of coming home? And what about Helen? That's exactly what I need to discuss with you. Lucy knows a lot of time has passed. She's anxious to get to know her daughter again, but she's also afraid of how Helen will react to her. During therapy, we worked intensively on issues of maternal guilt and the trauma of the accident. She's much better, but we know the family's readjustment will be a delicate process. After hanging up, Raphael sat in the garden, watching Helen play with the rose petals that had fallen to the ground. How would he explain to a 1-year-old that the mother she barely remembered was coming back? How would Lucy handle the fact that Helen had formed a deep bond with Maria, a stranger who had become a substitute mother figure? And how did he himself feel about his wife's return? Maria immediately noticed that something had changed in Raphael's demeanor. During dinner, he was distant, lost in thought. Helen, now much more attuned to the emotional atmosphere around her, also sensed the tension and became clingier than usual. "What happened?" Maria asked after putting Helen to bed. Raphael told her about the call from Dr. Clark, about Lucy's possible discharge, about all the doubts and fears that were now swirling in his mind. "I should be happy," he said, "but I'm scared. Scared that Lucy's return will undo all the progress Helen has made. Scared that I'll go back to being the absent, useless father I was before, and scared that Lucy won't be able to connect with Helen in the way she needs." Maria nodded understandingly. "Raphael, you're not the same person you were 6 months ago. Helen isn't the same child she was 6 months ago. And Lucy, from what you've told me, has also undergone profound transformations. You'll have to discover together how to be a family again. And you? Will you be here to help us through this transition?" The question Raphael asked echoed in the silence of the living room. Maria had been avoiding thinking about this, but she knew the time would come to face reality. She had become emotionally involved with this family in a way that went far beyond her professional responsibilities. Helen had become like a daughter to her, and Raphael had become a true friend. But she also knew that families need to learn to function on their own. "Raphael, I'll be here as long as you need me, but the 3 of you need to figure out how to be a family without relying on an outsider. Lucy needs to find her place as a mother again. You need to continue being the present father you've become, and Helen needs to learn to trust both of her parents." That night, Helen woke up crying around 2 in the morning, but it wasn't the desperate screams of months past. It was a common child's cry, easily soothed. Raphael went to her, and to everyone's surprise, she calmed down immediately in his arms. "Ma," Helen said, looking for Maria, Maria's sleeping, Raphael explained softly. Daddy's here. Do you want some water? Want me to sing to you? Helen considered the options for a few moments, then rested her head on her father's shoulder. "Dada," she murmured, and fell back asleep. It was in that moment that Raphael fully understood the transformation that had occurred. He was no longer a scary stranger in his daughter's life. He was daddy. He was safety. He was home. The next morning, as Maria prepared breakfast, she watched Raphael playing with Helen on the living room rug. They were building a tower with colored blocks, and Helen laughed every time the tower fell. It was a scene of simple, yet profoundly meaningful, domestic happiness. "Mama," Helen said suddenly, looking at Maria. Maria's heart ached. Helen had started calling her Mama, a child's adaptation of Mommy. It was an acknowledgement of the maternal role Maria had taken on, but also a painful reminder that this was not her real family. "I'm Maria, remember? Maria," she corrected gently. Helen tried to repeat it. Maia, managing a surprisingly good approximation. "Very good, Helen," Raphael praised. "Maria is our very special friend who helped us when we needed it." But Helen continued to alternate between Maia and Mama, as if her child's mind couldn't completely separate the two identities. It was that afternoon that the first major test of the new family dynamic occurred. Helen was playing in her room when she tripped and hit her knee on the floor. The loud cry that followed brought both Raphael and Maria running, but instead of automatically turning to Maria, as she had for weeks, Helen reached her arms out to Raphael. "Dada, Dada!" she cried, wanting her father's comfort. Raphael picked her up, examined the bruised knee, kissed the spot, and whispered reassuring words. Helen calmed down quickly, accepting her father's comfort without reservation. Maria watched the scene with a mixture of joy and melancholy. Joy because Raphael had finally completely taken on his paternal role. Melancholy because it meant her own importance in the family's life was diminishing as it should. That night, when Helen was asleep, Raphael and Maria had a conversation they both knew was inevitable. "Maria, how do you feel about Lucy coming back?" "Nervous," she admitted. "Helen has established a routine, a sense of security. The return of her biological mother will shake all of that up." "And how do you feel about no longer being the primary mother figure for Helen?" Maria took a long time to answer. "It's the right thing to happen. Helen needs her real mother, you need your wife, and Lucy needs the chance to be a mother again. But I won't lie, it's going to hurt. A lot." "You will always be important to us," Raphael said. "Helen will never forget what you did for her." "I will never forget." "I know," Maria said with a sad smile. "And that's already more than I could have asked for." By the end of that second week, Helen was speaking about 15 different words, eating normally, sleeping through the night, and showing physical affection for both Raphael and Maria. She was a completely different child from the traumatized, medicated girl Maria had found 3 weeks earlier, but they all knew the real test was yet to come: Lucy's return and the need to rebuild a family that had been torn apart by mental illness and brought back together by emotional healing. The day of Lucy's return dawned with a sky overcast typical of a London winter, as if nature itself were reflecting the emotional tension that hung over the house in Kensington. Raphael woke before his alarm at 5:30 in the morning, his stomach churning with nerves. After 4 months at the renewal clinic, his wife was coming home, and none of them knew for sure what this reunion would be like. Maria had spent the night awake, mentally organizing all the details she needed to share with Lucy about Helen's current routine. The girl now slept through the night, ate vegetables she once refused, spoke more than 20 different words, and had developed a curious and affectionate personality. But how do you explain to a mother that her daughter had completely transformed in her absence? Helen, of course, was unaware of the day's significance. She woke up at 7 as usual, looking for Maria with sleepy eyes babbling Ma-ia with the pronunciation that had become her trademark. She was wearing a light blue onesie that highlighted her dark eyes, and she held tightly to the blue scarf she never let go of, the last tangible trace of the mother she barely remembered. "Today is a special day, Helen," Maria said, while combing the girl's curly hair. "Your mommy is coming home." Helen tilted her head, processing the word mommy with the concentration of someone trying to decipher a code. "Mama?" she asked, pointing at Maria. "No, sweetie, your real mommy, the one who owns the blue scarf you love so much." The girl looked at the fabric in her hands, then back at Maria with a confused expression. To her, Maria had always been the present maternal figure. The idea of another mommy was too abstract a concept for her 15-month-old mind to fully comprehend. Raphael was in the garden, nervously tending to the plants, when the clinic's car pulled up in front of the house. Dr. Clark had insisted on accompanying Lucy personally on this first day to observe the family dynamic and intervene if necessary. Through the fence, Raphael saw the woman he hadn't seen in 4 months step out of the car, and his heart pounded. Lucy was visibly different. She had gained weight, her brown hair was well kept and tied in a ponytail, and there was a serenity in her movements that Raphael hadn't seen in a long time. But there was also anxiety in her eyes as she looked at the house where her daughter was growing up without her. "Raphael," said Dr. Clark, greeting him in the garden, "how should Lucy approach Helen? We know the girl has been through trauma and significant changes." "She's much better now," Raphael said, "but she's still cautious with strangers. And to her, Lucy has unfortunately become a stranger." The words stung Lucy like a knife, but she had prepared for this possibility during months of therapy. "I know it will take time," she said, her voice choked but controlled. "I'm prepared to rebuild our relationship from scratch if necessary." When they entered the house, Maria was in the living room with Helen in her lap, playing with some colored blocks. The girl was distracted, stacking and knocking down the pieces, when she suddenly noticed the presence of strangers. Her eyes fixed first on Dr. Clark, then on Lucy, and her reaction was immediate. She hid her face in Maria's neck, clutching the blue scarf like a shield. Lucy stopped at the entrance to the room, seeing for the first time in 4 months the daughter she had left as a crying baby, and now found as a developed, articulate child. The tears came before she could control them. "She's so big," she murmured. "So different." "Lucy?" Helen asked from Maria's lap, testing the name she had heard Maria mention a few times. Lucy's heart broke, hearing her own daughter pronounce her name as if she were any other stranger, but Dr. Clark had prepared her for this moment. "Hi, Helen," she said softly, crouching down to the child's level but maintaining a respectful distance. "Do you remember this blue scarf? It was mine. You took very good care of it for me." Helen looked at the fabric in her hands, then at Lucy, processing the information. Slowly she lifted the scarf and smelled it, as she always did when she was nervous or needed comfort. And that's when something magical happened. Even after 4 months, even with all the confusion and trauma she had faced, the familiar scent of Lucy's perfume was still embedded in that fabric. And somewhere deep in her emotional memory, Helen recognized that scent. Her eyes widened. She looked at Lucy with renewed attention, and then back at the scarf. "Mama?" she asked, but this time she wasn't looking at Maria. She was looking directly at Lucy. Lucy's tears fell freely now. "Yes, my love. I'm your mommy. Mommy's home." But Helen didn't run into Lucy's arms like in a romantic movie. Instead, she remained clinging tightly to Maria, watching Lucy with cautious curiosity. She was an intelligent child who had learned to be careful with sudden changes. Maria, sensing the delicate moment, sat on the floor, keeping Helen safe in her lap. "Helen, do you want to show your mommy how you can say new words?" Helen considered the proposal for a few seconds, then looked at Lucy and said clearly, "Da-da," pointing to Raphael. "Da-da," Lucy repeated, smiling through her tears. "You learn to say daddy. What else can you say?" "Son," Helen said, pointing to the window. "Tea," she said, pointing to the table where they used to have afternoon tea. "Ma'ia," she said, hugging Maria, and then in a moment of childish courage she pointed at Lucy and tried, Mama," Lucy whispered. "That's right, I'm your mummy." The process of reconnecting was slow and careful. Helen allowed Lucy to sit nearby but still kept Maria as an intermediary. When Lucy offered a small gift, a colorful picture book, Helen accepted, but she examined it with Maria first as if seeking approval. Dr. Clark watched everything attentively, making discreet notes. After 2 hours, he addressed all the adults present. "What I'm seeing here is very positive. Helen isn't rejecting Lucy, just being cautious, which is natural and healthy. Lucy is respecting the child's pace, not forcing physical proximity, and Maria is facilitating the transition very intelligently." "What do you suggest for the next few days?" Raphael asked. "Patience. Lucy should spend time with Helen every day, but without pressure. Let Helen control the pace of the reconnection. And Maria," he looked at her, "your presence will be crucial in this transition. Helen trusts you, so you can serve as a bridge between her and Lucy." During lunch, Helen showed another sign of progress. When Lucy offered to help feed her, Helen didn't refuse. She allowed Lucy to hold the spoon and help her eat, though. She still preferred Maria to be sitting beside her. It was during the afternoon nap that Lucy and Maria finally spoke alone. "I owe you so much," Lucy said, with deep sincerity. "Raphael told me everything. How Helen was when you arrived, the medication, how you helped her recover. I can never repay what you did for my daughter." "You don't owe me anything," Maria replied. "I did what anyone would do in my place. Helen is a special child who deserves all the love in the world." "But you became her mother when I couldn't be. That must have meant a lot to you." Maria took a moment to respond, choosing her words carefully. "Helen taught me that maternal love isn't about biology. It's about presence, care, dedication. You were always her mother, Lucy. I just took care of her until you could come back. And now, how do we make this transition? Helen clearly loves you like a mother. With time and patience, Helen is smart. She will learn that she can love me as a special friend and love you as mommy. A child's heart is big enough for many kinds of love." When Helen woke from her nap, something happened that surprised everyone. She woke up crying from a nightmare, as still occasionally happened. Raphael ran to the room, followed by Maria and Lucy. But instead of automatically looking for Maria, Helen reached her arms up, without specifying for whom. It was Lucy who approached first, instinctively. "Nightmare, my love. Mommy's here." And Helen, still half asleep and vulnerable, allowed Lucy to pick her up. They snuggled together, with Helen holding the blue scarf but accepting Lucy's maternal comfort. "Mama," Helen murmured, finally using the word for the right person. The weeks that followed were ones of constant adjustment, but with daily progress. Helen gradually transferred many of her emotional needs from Maria to Lucy, but maintained a special affection for the woman who had cared for her during the most difficult months of her life. Maria began to gradually reduce her presence in the house. First, she spent only the days there, leaving at night. Then, she alternated days. Finally, she visited only twice a week, allowing the family to find its own rhythm. The most moving moment came 3 months after Lucy's return. Helen, now 1.5 and speaking simple sentences, was playing in the garden with her parents when Maria arrived for one of her regular visits. The girl ran to her, but not with the desperation of dependence. It was the joyful run of a child seeing a beloved person. "Maia! Maia!" Helen shouted, hugging Maria's legs. Then she took her hand and pulled her towards her parents. "Mommy, Daddy, Maia!" It was an introduction. Helen was introducing her family to her special friend, integrating all the pieces of her world harmoniously. "Look, Maia," Helen said, pointing to a small tree they had planted in the garden. "Mommy's tree." Maria looked questioningly at Raphael and Lucy. "It's a tradition we started," Lucy explained. "Every time Helen overcomes an important milestone, we plant something in the garden. That's the tree from when she started trusting Daddy again. That one over there is from when she said Mommy to me for the first time. And that one," she pointed to a blooming rose bush, "is yours." "Mine?" "Maria's tree," Helen said, running to the rose bush. "Pretty Maia." Maria knelt beside the rose bush, her heart overflowing with emotion. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Helen." That afternoon, as she watched Helen play happily with her biological parents, Maria knew her mission there was complete. She had arrived as a cleaner, and had become part of this family's healing story. But now it was time to let them write the next chapters on their own. When she said goodbye that afternoon, Helen hugged her tightly and said, "Maia, come back." "Whenever you need me," Maria promised. "Always." 2 years later, Maria received a wedding invitation. Raphael and Lucy had decided to renew their vows, symbolizing their family's new beginning. Helen, now 3.5, was the flower girl. During the ceremony held in their own garden, Helen held her parents' rings in one hand and the blue scarf, now faded but still precious, in the other. When asked if she wanted to say something to the bride and groom, she turned to Maria, who was sitting in the front row, and said clearly, "Maria taught us that families are mended with love." And there, in that garden where there was once only pain and confusion, blossomed not only the plants they had carefully cultivated, but a family that had learned that healing comes from those we least expect, at the moments we need it most, and that true love sometimes arrives disguised as an ordinary job, performed by extraordinary people. Dear listeners, we hope the journey of Helen, Raphael, Lucy, and Maria has deeply touched your hearts. This story reminds us that salvation often comes through the most unlikely people who enter our lives at exactly the right moment. It teaches us that families can be healed, that children are resilient, and that true love sometimes needs to be patient enough to wait for the right time to bloom. If this narrative stirred emotions in you, if you saw yourselves reflected in any of the characters, please don't hesitate to express it. Hit the like button, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our moving stories, and tell us in the comments which moment touched you the most. Every day, we bring you narratives that explore the deepest corners of the human soul, stories that make us cry, smile, and above all, believe in the infinite capacity for transformation that exists within each of us. Until our next meeting, where a new story awaits to move you.